Morning YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. 31st of January 2016, preparing for the Outsiders.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not.
Thank you, Barry. Back again for another cracking year. Your outsiders this morning are Aaron Patrick. He's author of, and you'll see this in shops imminently, Credlin & Co., How the Abbott Government Destroyed Itself. He's also Deputy Editor of the Australian Financial Review. Terry Barnes is with us too. He's Principal of Cormorant Policy Advice. Maxine Beneva-Clark is with us as well, author of Foreign Soil. Her next book is out in August. It's a memoir. It's called The Hate Race, both through Hachette. Morning all.
Good morning.
Hello.
Authors in the house. This is so exciting. Look, I've got a little general knowledge quiz to begin. Are you ready? Fingers on buzzers. What have... It's either one of these three got in common or who's the odd person out. I think I'll go with who's the odd person out.
There are always two ways we can look at a situation. We can choose to get angry or not.
It is an extraordinary time to be an Australian, but I need to give it qualified agreement.
We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion.
Okay, Maxine, you go first.
I'm guessing Australians of the Year.
Well, except for Robin Williams at the end.
He's an honour. He can be an honorary Australian of the Year.
It was Robin Williams.
They're poets.
Well,
They're orators,
they
maybe.
are. We had Adam Goods, we had David Morrison, we had Robin Williams. My vague point there was alluding to this conversation we've been having this week about Australian of the Year, and in the wake of David Morrison getting the gong. What do you make of this argument, Terry? And this is that Australian of the Year is less a person of simple achievement and someone with a message, someone who is trying to instruct us in some point of our civil conduct.
Well, Jonathan, I think the days of the Seekers being Australians of the Year are long gone. It seems these days that somebody is being not only recognised for achievement, but also recognised for a cause. David Morrison has nominated several causes that he wants to be.
He's going to have a big year.
He's going to have a huge year. I mean, Rosie Batty did brilliantly last year in promoting awareness of domestic violence and getting things done about it and creating a political climate for change that didn't exist before. And she deserves a great deal of credit. But the reality is that it seems to be becoming what I guess Teddy Roosevelt would have called a bully-pulpit for whoever holds the job. And frankly, I think Australians don't need to be lectured all the time. And the thing that seems to be coming out in terms of the way that the office or the role is being used is that we're being told a lot about what's bad about ourselves as Australians, not what's good about ourselves. And I'd like to see that change. And to be honest, the only person who's got a right to lecture me is my wife. But I think the Australian of the Year needs to be somebody who reflects not only the values that they hold, but understands and engages with those of us who don't necessarily agree with them.
And bringing that thing into Australia Day, of course, Maxine, is a complexity of another sort as well. It's a difficult day, and then to have a totemic figure.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think Australia Day for a lot of Australians, namely Indigenous Australians and their supporters, is a day of mourning. And we all want to celebrate Australia. We all don't necessarily want to celebrate it on Australia Day, on that particular day, because of what it represents in the history. For me, I think what's changed over the years is the expectation on the Australian of the Year. Once upon a time you were named Australian of the Year, there was a ceremony. Now you give a speech and you are expected to demonstrate how you're going to contribute to society.
It used to be a bit like King of Moomba, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's the weight behind it now. People want to know, well, now you're Australian of the Year, what are you going to do? How are you going to contribute?
What is it about us that has made that change, do you think? I mean, are we looking for that sort of instruction or that sort of purpose?
I feel like we are. I feel like post-Howard, we're looking for, it's more difficult to be, I guess, an activist or a progressive or someone who is kind of butting up against conservative policy when we had so many years of conservative government. And I feel like that's contributed towards that kind of the Australian of the Year.
Aaron, to bring you in, do we have therefore sort of an activist Australia Day committee there working along that cause that Maxine points to?
Well, it feels like it a little bit, doesn't it? Because David Morrison, obviously a fantastic candidate, and he's had a great career, but he was selected because he took a position which it seems that the committee, likes, and it's sort of hard to argue. It's such a fascinating issue because are we choosing someone because of their contribution to society or because they are effective at advancing a political or social agenda that we agree with and we admire? And if it's the latter, and I suspect it is in this case, well, is that so wrong? David Morrison, look, he's copped a lot of flack, or a bit of flack from the right this week, and there's some more out today. But I met the guy. He's pretty humble. He's a pretty modest person, and I thought that was, even if you disagree with what he did, I thought that was a pretty brave thing to do. Stand up there and say to his own organisation, if which has a sort of entrenched culture, look them in the eye metaphorically and say, if you're not going to change, then leave. And I thought that was pretty brave.
Is it so bad, Terry? Is it so bad to have somebody with a strong message? I mean, we don't get a lot of that sort of sense of constructive social or sort of moral guidance. There's a way perhaps of accessing it.
Well, that may be so, but I think just to take up Maxine's point, it troubles me a little as a conservative to see that Australians of the Year in recent years tend to be coming from the progressive side of the debate. I mean, if say a conservative was nominated as Australian of the Year, would they be given the same reception and the same respect and regard as, say, Rosie Batty or David Morrison? I'm not so sure about that. And as I said before, I think that...
Give us an example. I mean, what sort of person would you think of in that role?
Well, I'd think of somebody like John Howard, for instance, if he'd become Australian of the Year for his achievements. I think there would be a huge national debate about it, and particularly concerns from the progressive side of politics. So,
but he's a politician, though. Terry.
Well, what I'm trying to get at, Aaron, is that it's a set of values here, and I get the feeling that the Australia Day Council, however they choose the Australian of the Year, looks for people who are reflecting a particular value set at the moment rather than the broad base of the community.
David Morrison is also hardly the most progressive choice. I mean, people on the left were saying, really, a straight white military man is our highest honour for Australia Day. So he copped it from both sides.
There's something there about our calibration, I think, on what's progressive and what's conservative here. And as you say, if a straight white former head of army can be representative of some sort of progressive Fruit Loop, then our calibration is of what centre in our sort of political conversation is sort of weirdly askew.
Well, Kate McGregor, he was Queenslander of the Year, felt that that he was a really conventional choice, and a sort of predictable choice, a safe choice. So he's sort of copying it from both sides, which perhaps that's a good sign.
Well, let's stay on that point though of our sort of political calibration, because one of the things we've seen in this past week has been around Tony Abbott's decision to A, stay in the Parliament, and B, make the now fabled address to the group in the US, the Alliance Defending Freedom. I mean, Terry, is this, as Parliament comes back this week, there is clearly something of a schism within Australian conservative politics.
Well, I think Australian conservative politics, and certainly Liberal Party politics, has been, as John Howard mentioned him again, is a very broad church, and there are certainly people at the more conservative side of the broad church who are expressing a few views at the moment. And Tony Abbott himself, I think, is perfectly entitled to express his own views on issues such as same-sex marriage and Cory Bernardi, for that matter, and others. But the thing that struck me about that speech in America was that he made the point about the same-sex marriage plebiscite, that despite his personal views, he would abide by the result of that vote. And if the Australian people say yes, then he will accept that.
which Maxine is a reasonably important moment. We had some of Tony Abbott's nominal allies within the parliament saying that, well, regardless of the view of the people, that wouldn't change their perspective. And I guess that's fair enough, but that raises the question of why you would bother to consult the Australian people on this issue in any event.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I feel as if, Tony Abbott, in a way, well, he has to say that he's going to abide by the Australian people. I feel like when you go and you give a speech to such a, conservative, Christian, pro-Republican body, and you're, I guess, internationally espousing ideas that differ to those at home or those that your government's discussing, there has to be a disclaimer there.
Which is an interesting thing, Aaron. I mean, the question of, Terry says, of course, Tony Abbott should have that right, but there's a question there of whether, as a former Prime Minister, whether he, admitting that he can, whether he should make those sorts of speeches and draw that sort of controversy. You're the author of Credlin and Co., how the Abbott government destroyed itself. It's in shops this week. Insight from that work on what's motivating Tony Abbott in this new role as sort of the conductor of the right in the Liberal Party?
Well, in a way, Tony Abbott's now liberated because he can go out there and he can advocate for all these conservative causes. And he is a pretty deeply conservative man by the standards of Australian society, freely, because he's had this cabinet responsibility lifted from his shoulders. And so, in a way, I'm not surprised that he's going out there, and I think he will push the boundaries a bit. But you could say the hypocrisy is that when he was Prime Minister, him and Peter Credlin ran such a disciplined, tight ship that they would have never tolerated the kind of freelancing that it seems he's likely to engage in himself.
What would Peter Credlin have done to Tony Abbott
Well,
if he was a backbencher in an Abbott government?
Peter Credlin was ruthless. It wasn't backbenchers. Backbenchers were terrified of it. It was the cabinet, she really clamped down on, and Wobertied a cabinet minister who went off reservation. And you have cabinet ministers, they'd see articles appearing in the newspapers about their own portfolio. They'd have no idea where it came from, and they'd go to cabinet, look around, and wait to see if they're going to get told off.
Who was in charge in the Abbott government?
Peter Credlin was in charge. Peter Credlin was so powerful that people referred to within the government as the Prime Minister. And they weren't being ironic. They genuinely thought she made more decisions than Tony Abbott. So yeah, she was in charge. She was running the government to all intents and purposes, as much as any one person can.
Outsiders here on Sunday, Aaron Patrick there, his new book, Credlin and Co., How the Abbott Government Destroyed Itself. Terry Barnes is with you too, Principal of Cormorant Policy Advice, and Maxine Beneva Clark. Foreign Soil, her latest book, she has a memoir, The Hate Race, coming out in August. And Terry, you've had close encounters with Ms. Credlin yourself.
Yes, I have been Credlined in my time, both in terms of political things, but also as some people might recall, I was the GP co-payment guy a couple of years ago, and I was left to basically the Abbott office, the Abbott government, left me to hang like a shag on a rock, I suppose, advocating the idea before the 2014 budget, but when things went pear-shaped afterwards, I never heard from them. They basically, I think if you're either with Peter Credlin or against her, and there was no in between for her. But the problem for me was that her role in the government was so strong and so central that nothing could be done without her say so. And yes, I think the comments that Aaron made are absolutely right. She was seen as the de facto Prime Minister, and when a staffer, and I was a former Abbott staffer in an earlier career, becomes a public figure in their own right, they really shouldn't be there.
Maxine, as a voter, as a member of this great polity, I mean, how does that sort of description of the internals of politics strike you, that sort of the unelected power of someone like Peter Credlin?
Well, I think it's quite disturbing. I think voters obviously know that it goes on, but, to know that somebody holds that kind of power, you're not voting for them, you're voting for, the person who's been voted Prime Minister. So it is disturbing. I think, I think Abbott's looking to continue positioning himself as the leading voice of the, ultra-right conservative, and it's probably not a bad career move, in terms of salvaging what's been lost.
Okay, well, I'm approaching the upload limit, so here endeth the first video. I don't know if the first Moondog's going to be on this week. We'll see.